On section 6.3, we're going to factor trinomials, but the leading coefficient is not a 1. I know we talked about grouping when we had four terms, and I know last section we talked about the x thing, what we see at the right in green. So now we're going to start in that way. We're going to think of two numbers that multiplied is equal to 12. You see 2 times 6 gives me 12. So I'm going to multiply the first and the last number. So two numbers that multiplied equals 12, but when I add them, is equal to 7. You see where I got my 7 from. So in this case, I'm thinking 3 and 4. Right? Multiplied equals 12, added is equal to 7. Now, I'm not going to go straight to my parentheses like I did in section 6.2 because my leading coefficient is not a 1. In this case, it's 2. This 3 and 4 is how I'm going to split my middle term. So I'm going to have 2x to the second plus 3x plus 4x plus 6. Once again, I just split my middle term. All right, so now looking at the first two terms, 2x to the second plus 3x, I can factor in x out. Once I divide both by x, I will get 2x plus 3. Looking at my last two terms, I can divide both of them by a positive 2, divide both by 2, and we're going to get 2x plus 3. So my factoring will end up being 2x plus 3 and x plus 2. So again, here, let me look for two numbers that multiplied is equal to negative 6. Once again, I multiply first and last number, but when I add my numbers is equal to positive 1, right? My number in the middle. Because they multiply to a negative, I'm thinking of different signs. I'm thinking of positive 3, negative 2. Once again, because my first term is not a 1, in this case it's a 6, my 3 and negative 2 is just how I am going to split my middle term. So I have 6r squared plus 3r minus 2r minus 1. On my first two terms, let me divide both by 3r. I'm going to factor a 3r, so I'm going to have 2r plus 1. On my last two terms, let me factor a negative 1 out, so I'm going to have 2r plus 1. My answer should be 2r plus 1 and 3r minus 1. Same thing with example B. I'm looking for two numbers that multiplied is equal to negative 24, but when I add them is equal to negative 5. They multiply to a negative sign, so the signs might be different. I'm thinking of positive 3, negative 8. So I'm just going to split my middle term as 12z squared. That's my first term. My middle term, I'm going to split it as plus 3z minus 8z. And then minus 2. Looking at the first two terms, I can divide them both by 3z. So I'm going to have 4z plus 1. Looking at my last two terms, I can divide them both by a negative 2. And I'm going to have a 4z plus 1. So my factoring should end up being 4z plus 1 and 3z minus 2. On example C, I'm looking for two numbers that multiplied is equal to negative 30. But when I add my numbers is equal to 1. I'm ignoring my letters for right now. So multiplied is equal to a negative, so the signs are different. I'm thinking of 6 and negative 5. That's just how I'm going to split my middle term. So I have 10m squared for the first term plus 6mn minus 5mn minus 3n squared. Looking at the first two terms, 10 and 6, I can divide both by 2. And I can also factor an m out. Divide both of these by 2m. And I'm going to have 5m plus 3n. Looking at my last two terms, I can factor a negative sign out. And I can also factor an n out. So let me divide both by negative n. So I'm going to have 5m plus 3n My answer should be 5m plus 3n and 2m minus n. Now, lastly, my numbers, I'm not going to go 28 times 30. Now, that thinking that might be too big. I see I have x to the fifth, x to the fourth, x to the third. I could probably make things smaller. Let me divide everything, you know, my numbers, let me divide everything by a 2. And let me factor an x to the third out. So I have 14x squared minus 29x minus 15. Numbers are a little bit big still, but at least it's easier for me to go 14 times 15 than 28 times 30. So I'm thinking 14 times a negative 15, that is negative 210. I want two numbers that multiplied is equal to negative 210. When I add my numbers, I want them to be negative 29. So they multiplied to a negative, so that must be, signs must be different. Now, factors of 210, I'm going to go 2 times 210. They don't subtract to 29. 2 times 105. 3 times 70. Still doesn't quite work. 4 is not a factored. 5 times 42. 6 times 35. If I subtract 6 and 35, that does give me 29. So here I'm going to do positive 6, negative 35. All right, that's how I'm going to split my middle term. So I'm just looking at the parentheses. I have 14x squared plus 6x minus 35x minus 15. Looking at the first two terms, I can divide both of them by 2x. So I'm going to have 7x plus 3. Looking at my last two terms, I can divide them both by a negative 5. And I'm going to have 7x plus 3. So my parentheses only, I'm going to have 7x plus 3 and 2x minus 5. But on my answer, make sure you include the greatest common factor that we took out at the beginning.